The very first thing we can learn from Jorden Peterson as a public speaker is his ability to use inflection. What does inflection mean? It simply means using our voice, our tonality, to communicate an emotion. For instance, if I were to tell you that yesterday was the happiest day of my life, you're not going to believe me. But if I add a level of inflection to it, I'll say, yesterday was the happiest day of my life. And leaving my overacting aside, that's what inflection is. And Jorden Peterson does this incredibly well. Throughout the video, we're going to keep cutting to some of his speeches and presentations to demonstrate the principles that he's using and talk about how we can incorporate them within our communication as well. Okay, the second thing he uses, which is an extension of inflection, is emphasis. Emphasis is important in almost every situation, but for Jorden Peterson, it's even more important because some of the topics and concepts he talks about are a little complex to understand. So by using emphasis, by really beating down on certain words, it helps the audience understand what is the most important thing we need to take away from a particular sentence or paragraph. Similarly, the third thing that we can learn from him is his use of hands to demonstrate a certain point. Again, because sometimes he talks about complex concepts, because of his hand gestures, it makes it a little more comprehensible for the audience member to understand what is it that he's trying to say. And as speakers or presenters, regardless of the topic that we might be speaking on, if we can combine the elements of inflection, emphasis, and hand gestures to demonstrate certain concepts, it will make our ideas much easier to remember. The next time you're practicing a presentation, when you're trying to explain a certain concept, video record yourself explaining that particular concept and ask yourself, am I using inflection, which means am I using my tone to convey the emotion that I want the audience to feel? Am I emphasizing on the important words so that the listener can take away purely what's the most important thing I'm trying to say? And am I using my hands to make it easier for the audience to understand my concept? Point number 4 is to contrast our energies. We've all seen speakers who are very, very energetic on stage. And at the same time, we've seen speakers who are very, very dull on stage. And sticking to both these extremes is, in most cases, not a good idea. Instead, it's good to contrast between these energies, simply to jolt the audience's attention back to you. And Jorden Peterson does this incredibly well. When he's talking about some concept that he's excited about, he'll be very loud and energetic, and then at some point, he'll immediately slow his pace, stop moving, and take a step back. And that contrast in energy really helps the audience understand the mood of the presentation. And it keeps them on their toes because the speaker is breaking patterns. If you constantly go on a high tone, the audience will sometimes zone out, similar to a low tone. But if we keep contrasting, we keep them more engaged. Next point is to not memorize, but to adapt. Jorden Peterson famously has said that he does not memorize his speeches or presentations. Instead, he immerses himself into a particular subject so much that he can simply adapt himself depending on what the crowd or the situation is. And that adaptability is one of the core elements that separate good presenters from the average ones. The inexperienced presenter will have something prepared and memorized, and they'll go and speak that no matter what. The experienced presenter will understand what the mood of the audience is, what the setting is like, and at some points in time, we may have to adapt our delivery, our content, to make sure we're being as valuable as possible to our listeners. Next point that I love about Jorden Peterson is that at some points in time, he puts himself on the same level as the audience. This means that if he's on a height or if everyone is sitting up and looking down at him, at some point in time, he'll either go into the audience or he'll put himself on the same level as them. And this really makes him a much more relatable speaker as opposed to most presenters who are standing on some sort of a pedestal when it comes to informing or educating a crowd on a certain concept. Taking from this point, another thing he does really well is working the room. We'll very rarely see Jorden Peterson stand behind a lectern or a podium and just give a speech from one spot. No, he's constantly moving around. He's constantly engaging with the crowd. He's moving from one side of the stage to the other. He's going into the audience. And that movement is what really makes him a really powerful presenter. It's because his energy tends to rub off on us. Unlike speakers who stick to one spot and just keep speaking, at some point in time, again, because there isn't pattern breaking happening, as audience members, we'll tend to zone out at some point in time. Another thing to take away from him walking the room is that he never looks at his slides, or very rarely looks at his slides. I've seen some fantastic speakers, even great TED Talks, where the speaker is just standing and looking at the slides and switching back and forth with the audience here and there, which is fine. But we tend to forget sometimes that when we pay so much attention to our slides that we forget that this is not the presentation, we are the presentation. And when we look at it that way, the slides are merely a redirection tool, something to, again, break the audience away from just us talking to show them something else that will appeal to their visual senses, their auditory senses, anything besides our own voice. But at the same time, it is just a complementary measure. It is not the main thing. The next thing that he does so well is maintaining the gaze. Most of us know the importance of eye contact in public speaking. And yes, eye contact is important. We must look at the audience all the time in their eyes. But Jorden Peterson takes it a level further by maintaining an audience gaze. What this means is that he picks one or two members from the audience at certain points in time and just speaks directly at them. And that energy, that focus, it doesn't alienate the rest of the crowd. It in fact creates another level of intimacy between the speaker and the audience. And he doesn't just do that to one person constantly. Throughout his speech, you'll notice he's doing that to different members of the audience, trying to connect with as many people as he can, as opposed to maintaining flimsy eye contact. The next thing he does so well is the power of repetition. It's a very simple point. If you want the audience to remember something, we repeat it so that they can remember it more. As simple as that. But we still don't tend to use it as often as we should. The next point, again, something very simple, is to simply pause before important points. Sometimes because of our pure excitement, I even catch myself doing this in these YouTube videos, that because we're so excited to talk about certain topics, we forget to add some silences. And there's so much said within these pauses. They can be so powerful to communicate an important point, to make the audience think about a question or an idea, but we don't tend to use them as often as we should. And it's something that we can really learn from Jorden Peterson. And the last point, which is maybe one of the main reasons that he's such a powerful presenter, is his ability to show pure enthusiasm on stage. Whatever topic he's talking about, he's just so excited about it. It makes the audience want to pay attention, simply because we can very much see in his eyes that he's genuinely trying to add value to us. And that's what good public speakers and presenters do. It's not about all the tactics that we discussed earlier. It's not just about body language, voice modulation. All those things are fine. But if the audience does not see that we are genuinely trying to add value to them, they're not going to want to pay attention. And that's about it. 13 quick lessons that we can learn from Jorden Peterson about public speaking and communications. Did you agree with them? Did you disagree with them? Let me know in the comments below. These are just my opinions. If you have any more questions about things like public speaking, communications, we have an entire website with in-depth articles and resources dedicated just for that. So go check out franticallyspeaking.com.